Why does the black man serve the white man? Why does everything the black man do benefit the white man? Why does the black man say freedom is doing what I want to do? And why is it that everything he wants to do enriches the European?
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Holipsism was a word that I created that is a combination of two things that are supposed to be the opposite of one another. It's holism and solipsism. And holism is, seeing everything as a part of the whole, and solipsism is the belief that, there is nothing but the self. So I took both of those things and put them together and came up with Holipsism as a general philosophy of mine that things aren't always diametrically opposed to one another. A lot of times they're just complementary opposites.
Now, I hear a lot of people using this word woke, and I think some folks might classify you as being woke. Would you agree with that?
I don't use that word woke. I understand what they mean, but I wouldn't classify myself as woke because I don't think that the things that I talk about require you to be woke.
Now, what you're all about is land, infrastructure, and nationhood.
Right.
Okay, so can you tell? I'll let you explain about that.
How that came about, like the concept of land, infrastructure, and nationhood is nothing new. So I just want to, state that. It's not like we came up with some new concept or some new principle. This is stuff that Marcus Garvey talked about. This is stuff that Elijah Muhammad talked about, Noble Drew Ali, and other various people, the people who were behind and started Liberia. It's the concept that in order for you to have real power, you have to have a piece of land that you can control. You have to have infrastructure, which is the hard infrastructure, which is the fixed things inside of your nation, and the soft infrastructure, which is like the institutions that maintain it. And then you have nationhood, which is basically the banner that all of the people that live on the land exist under. And it is our viewpoint that Africans in America especially, and Africans at certain places throughout the diaspora, never had a land of their own. Now, there are other African nations, obviously, on the continent, but blacks, and I'm talking about victims of the transatlantic slave trade, never had an opportunity to be in control of the land that they live in. They've always been basically living under socioeconomic and political context of whoever stole them from the land that they were from. And so it's our opinion that, people talk about reparations and stuff, and the first part of reparations is repair. And if you're going to talk about reparations, what are you actually repairing? And what we're saying is you're repairing your nation. So when you look at reparations in terms of nationhood, it takes on a completely different context than when people talk about reparations in terms of just getting a handout or getting a check.
You think that's ever going to happen?
No. Actually, if I were in charge, if I were white folks, I would cut the check. You know why?
Why?
Because once I cut the check, then the whole slavery argument is over. And it would make sense because we already know what's going to happen. Since we're not organized, since we don't look at ourselves as a nation, it'll be just like that Dave Chappelle skit.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Get some money, spend it, and then the slavery, the talk and discrimination and racism is off the table now. So if I were them, I would do it. But, it's not going to happen because to be honest, we don't pose any serious threat to them.
And you say that because?
Because we don't have any intentions of gaining power. What is the threat that we pose to the system if our ideal situation is fighting for equality within their system?
I have this feeling or this look at it that it's always the donkey and the carrot, and the donkey just never can quite get to it. Centuries and decades of fighting for equality, for acceptance, for recognition, and it's just always coming up short.
Yeah. Well, let's look at it in a modern context. Let's say you open up a club, right? What's the best way to get people to go to your club? You have to make it exclusive. So when people go to your club, you reject people, you turn them down, you make it seem like, oh, well, you have to be a certain type to get in this club. So you make it very exclusive, and then what psychologically that does, now it makes people want to get into it. Because now getting into it becomes a status thing. And that's what they've done. Like I've made the joke on my most recent videos that people are talking about getting into a race war in America. And I'm like, why would I go into a race war over Iowa? Like, what is there in America that I want to go into a race war with white folks over? That just doesn't make sense to me. But it makes perfect sense if they've already made their club exclusive and you want to get into it. You actually want to fight and take over the club. Because you feel it's that valuable that there's no way I can leave this because this is where you need to be. I mean, there was a guy, you ever heard of this dude, Jesse Lee Peterson?
Yeah, I know he is.
Jesse Lee Peterson made the argument that slavery, he said in his quote, in his words, thank God for slavery. And it sounds extreme and it sounds crazy, but honestly, a lot of black folks kind of agree with him. I mean, isn't that crazy?
It's crazy. It's crazy. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here and ask, what if blacks weren't brought here?
Well, I would have a caveat to that or something to ask in regards to that. Are you saying what if there was no transatlantic slave trade?
Correct.
Oh, if there was no transatlantic slave trade, they probably wouldn't be in America.
With all the free labor and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. They would have had to try to find somebody else to take, and I don't think they would have had a really good time trying to take the Chinese.
Well,
I don't know if that would have worked.
The British dominated the Chinese for a while, 100 years or so?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I can imagine, North Americans making their way to China and doing, the same thing. Only in this case, they would be bringing back Chinese slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm saying is that either way, they would have found another group, whether it's the Irish or the Native Americans or the Chinese, they would have found another group. Now, if they went ahead and did that, what would have happened? What would the continent of Africa, I hate to lump all those countries into one, but what would it look like?
Wow, that's tough because there's a lot of internal things that we had that I think was a problem before the white man came. So I'm not going to, it would be nice to say that everything would have been, fantastic and it would have been like, we would have been like Wakanda. But honestly, one of the biggest problems that we had just on the continent itself is that there wasn't any real consistency and unity across the continent. So that if, let's say, all right, I'll kind of compare it to like the 50 states in America. Nobody's just going to come rolling up into New York or rolling up into California without the entire U.S. government knowing about it. But in Africa, you know, people were able to roll up into our shores, and because there was no real communication between different nations and countries, they were able to infiltrate and get inside and do a lot of damage. So would that have happened had they not come? Like, would we have eventually united Africa? We would have had a better chance at it. But I can't say for sure that that's what would have happened. So it's speculation.
Okay. Now, how do we go about acquiring land?
Now, keep in mind, I'm going to try to answer this from my perspective because there's different perspectives on how to obtain land and within the BAIO. Like, people are doing, have different philosophies with that, different ways of going about doing it.
Before you continue, can you let them know what BAIO is?
Black African Infrastructure Organization.
Okay.
And basically it's an organization of African-centered progressives and nationalists who believe in the concept of land, infrastructure, and nationhood. And actually, you can access us on our Ning site. It's BAIO Afrikstan, AFRIKSTAN 5 at ning.com. I have to be kind of careful in terms of how I address this question because I don't want to give away too many details of what we're trying to do now, but okay. I can give you like a general take on what I think the process should be for obtaining land. Purchasing is one way, but what I feel is Africans on the continent and Africans in America can engage in so many mutually beneficial projects. And I'm talking about projects that would benefit Africans in America and projects that would benefit Africans on the continent from whatever particular nation that you want to deal with. I don't want to go into too many details about what those projects might be, but just that concept itself, there's mutually beneficial projects that we could engage in where, let's say we had a small enclave of African Americans that came over to whatever country on the continent, and we wanted to engage in those projects with the existing governments. We can do that, and we can do a project just as a tester, just to see the results of it and see the benefits of it. And once that project was completed and everybody could see the benefits from it, we benefited from it, they benefited from it, the locals benefited from it, then the question would be, well, rather than trying to do business over in America and coming here by plane and going back to America and coming here by plane, why don't we set up a small enclave where we can be on the continent and do business with the local government? That's step number one. And that doesn't necessarily even require you purchasing land. The government would be more than willing to set aside land for you if they know, oh, look at what we did with this group of people and look at how it benefited our nation. So what would be, it would be like a no-brainer. Or it would be like if they did want to create a situation where you're actually purchasing any particular land, it would probably be for pennies on the dollar because they know that by you being involved in their government and being involved in their land, they benefit somehow from your existence there. So it wouldn't be a situation that happened in Liberia where you have people who feel like there's some invading force coming over and they're coming to take over and do whatever we want to do. Our whole purpose for being there is to cooperate and engage with the existing government and the local people. So it would be a different strategy from what you normally see.
Now, for infrastructure, what is infrastructure? It's such a huge term that, encompasses so much of a society. Can you give me some examples of an infrastructure?
Infrastructure, they have two types of infrastructure. One is the hard infrastructure, which would be your roads, your highways, your tolls, your electrical lines, your gas piping. So when America itself loves, like that's what they specialize in, is infrastructure. So when they go into another land, like let's say Iraq or Afghanistan and different places like that, what they want to do is control the infrastructure of the land. Because if you control the infrastructure of the land, then you basically control the land. Like who's the, just because the government, like whoever is in charge of the government, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're in charge of the land. And this is something that Africans have to understand too, because the Chinese are trying to establish infrastructure in Africa.
Yeah, I've been seeing documentaries on Chinese corporations making their way into Africa and bringing resources. But, of course, my senses starts tingling. And, I'm like, I believe in altruism, but, yeah, it sounds too good to be true. What's really happening, is this just another form of colonialism, but from, from the East? You know what I mean? Yeah.
It can definitely turn into that if you don't have an agenda. Like if you're playing chess and a person has an understanding of what an opening is and a mid game and an end game, and you're just playing, just moving pieces around because this is fun, you're gonna get your ass beat. So the Chinese having their own agenda doesn't really bother me. Like I've made this point on my show before. The word agenda is not necessarily a bad word. And an agenda doesn't mean that whatever your agenda is going to happen. It just means that you have a plan. So as people talk about the so-and-so agenda or the this agenda, it's like, okay, I mean, every football team's agenda is to win the Super Bowl. How many teams actually win it? You know what I mean? There's only one that actually wins it. So just because you have an agenda doesn't mean that your agenda is going to come to fruition. So my point is, but you should at least have one. You should have a goal. And our problem is we don't have a goal. We don't have an end game. We just playing just to be playing. To be honest with you, we're not even in a position to play the game because we refuse to get organized.
When people hear nationhood, for some people, it sounds like nationalism.
It is.
Now,
to a certain degree.
But nationalism has such a bad association with that name.
I don't have a problem with nationalism. I don't think that I think that a lot of the terms that we're used to are not necessarily the ways that we're going to operate. Let's say we get a nation of our own right now. I believe in learning from the past and learning not to repeat the same mistakes of the past. And the beautiful part about forming a nation now is that you have all this history laid out before you. You have all the ways in which things went wrong. And you can avoid those pitfalls in your fledgling nation by taking those things into consideration when you're building it. What do you want your government to be like? If it's nationalist, what type of nationalism is it? Are we talking about North Korea style nationalism? Are we talking about social democracy? So I don't have a problem with the word nationalism. It's just I believe that, and I've used this before, is that Bruce Lee had I don't want to say style, but a philosophy of martial arts that he called Jeet Kune Do. And basically, the overall philosophy that he had was that you absorb what's useful, discard what's useless, and create something of your own. And I believe that the way that you govern yourself should be the same. It's like if I asked you what size screw do you need to, or what size tool do you need to accomplish a certain task, you have to first find out, well, what's the task? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? And then you come up, and then you can decide what tool you want to use. And I believe that governments that operate efficiently and properly in the world today have that philosophy.
What government can you use that as an example?
I think the best governments today are the social democracies, like the governments in the Scandinavian regions. And that's, I think categorically that's correct, because when you look at the top countries in the world and you compare them in terms of the happiness index, which is the happiness of its citizens, the upward mobility, the like the countries that take care of its people, those countries are always in the top 5. Okay. That's why I found it funny when Trump said, why don't we have Norwegians coming over instead of these shithole countries? Remember that statement he made?
Yeah, I remember.
About the shithole countries.
Yep.
And everybody was offended because he called, the countries, the African countries and nations shitholes. But what I found interesting and nobody even harped on is, why would somebody from Norway come to a shithole like the United States of America? Nobody even brought that up. I'm like, do you not realize these people to Norway, this is a shithole country?
I'm going to switch gears here for a second. We're going to switch into leadership role. Do you consider yourself a leader?
No.
Why not?
And actually, I'm glad you touched on that, because I've been dealing with a lot of people trying to derail the conversation of land infrastructure and nationhood. And one of the arguments that they'll use is that, well, you're a hypocrite. You're being contradictory because you talk about and you rail against America, but yet you're still here in America. And my answer to that is, I'm not getting the point. What does that have to do? When you talk about land infrastructure and nationhood, one man and one person cannot create a nation for a collective and a group of people. So if I get on, and I am more than capable, I have a passport and I have enough money where if I want to book a flight tomorrow, I can book a flight, get on a plane, and go over to Africa. And when I get there, then what am I going to do? I can probably get some property, buy a villa, retire, sip on some Mai Tais. And what will that do for land infrastructure nationhood for the vast majority of our people over here who are nationalists and who want a place of their own? But see, I understand what they're doing. When you can't attack the concept itself, what you got to do is attack the person who's talking about the concept and then try to drag the concept down with the person. It's actually a pretty good, decent strategy. Unfortunately, it's not working because I've already expressed this before and I've already explained it to people that I'm not a leader. I am not the king of the BAIO. I'm not the king of land infrastructure nationhood. If I'm gone, just like my best friend and one of the guys that I was working with doing something overseas in the continent, Big Dev, just recently passed in November. I mean, it took everybody aback. But BAIO didn't die. Land infrastructure nationhood didn't die. When Holip is gone and Holip can't communicate or make videos anymore, guess what? The concept of land infrastructure nationhood will go on way after I'm gone. So no, I'm not a leader.
In one of your videos.
And if anything, that makes my voice, to me, even more powerful. Because since I'm not a leader, and I'm letting everybody know that you don't have to be a genius to come up with these concepts or to embrace and understand the concepts. I'm just a regular dude from Brooklyn.
Why do you think there's this obsession with finding a leader? You see so many people popping up. I mean, not just now, but, in the past as well. But currently it's on hyper mode where everyone's, grabbing a torch to, lead us out of lead us to the promised land. What is this obsession with finding a leader?
Well, one of the things that plays a part in it is religion. Religion is about messiahs and saviors and leaders, and people who are religious people. Quite naturally, if you create, let's say, a society or a system that is conducive to those type of beliefs, then the people will support it. And what's the leader or the savior in those type of situations? A king, a dictator, And I don't know if you want to do this, but I wanted to answer your question by comparing it to the movie that just happened, the Black Panther movie.
Oh, yeah, I was going to bring that up.
But I'm
going
to get into spoilers. I mean, I guess we can say spoilers so that if anybody doesn't want to hear this part, you can, shut it down. But one of the things that I found interesting, did you see the movie yet?
I haven't seen it yet, but I've watched some other reviews of it, so I've already gotten enough spoilers, but I'm going to go see it anyway.
One of the things that I found interesting is, and this is, nobody really touched on this, but one of our shows that we do is a sports talk show called In the Paint. And it's hosted by Max 611 and Big Brother R. And they did a review of the Black Panther movie, and one of the callers had touched on this, and we had a discussion about it, and it ties into the question that you asked. Eric Killmonger, the character who came into Wakanda, was able to become king right away, and the reason why is because of how faulty that monarchy system is. That was the exact reason why he was able to rise to power so quickly, is because their system of government was faulty. Had there not been a monarchy in existence and these arcane ancient rules, then that guy would have never been allowed to become king. And that's basically the answer to the question. Is the reason why those type of things are not really good is that they're arcane, they're archaic, and they just don't work in the modern context. What works in the modern context is democracies. And whether people like it or love it, the facts are there. It just shows that when you look at the top governments working in the world today, competing on the world stage, social democracies are kicking everybody's ass.
This leads me to my next question. Does the church play a role in our demise or uplift?
Yeah, without question, the demise. And mainly it's because they've inserted themselves into things that they really shouldn't be inserted into, like government. Trying to control leadership and stuff like that. Like the church, there should have been, or like at least in the beginning in America, there was a separation of church and state. But now the lines have been blurred so much that the state really is like a super PAC now.
How does that translate within
like
the black
lobbyist group?
How does that translate into the black community?
Well, since the black community is very religious and very into the church yields a lot of influence and power in that regard. So if the church is really politically apathetic, then the people are usually politically apathetic. So it plays a part in that. It's like if the church doesn't see itself as being a part of something real and tangible and concrete in this world, and is basically preaching to our people pie in the sky, otherworldly philosophies, then people don't feel a vested interest in what's going on here right now. Because, why would you if you're going to get yours in the sweet by and by? Now,
do you belong to any religion?
No.
Okay. How did you I'm sure. Well, actually, let me not presume things. Did you grow up in a Christian family, or were you sort of? Do you come from a family that was a-religious, or sort of indifferent towards religion, or apathetic towards religion?
I grew up in a family that was, I think, typical of most people in religions. Like, I've come from the philosophy that most people don't really believe in a religion that they practice. But it's like a social thing. Like,
yep.
My father was a Jehovah's Witness, if you can believe that, and my mom was from a Baptist Christian background.
Did he disown you when you found out you don't believe? No, I'm kidding. my brother
kind of took care of the heavy lifting for me.
All right.
So by the time I came around, he was like, "Oh, man, I ain't messing around with it." But they used to go, like, he used to go to the Kingdom Hall, and when we were younger, we would go there. But it was like a social event. It wasn't really like they were hardcore Christians, like where you had to be down with this. Like, there are some Christian families that they're really deep into it. We weren't like that. Like, when we were my father was from South Carolina, so when we would go to South Carolina and we would be with his family, we would go to Kingdom Hall. And my mom is from North Carolina, so when we go to North Carolina, then we go to the Christian Baptist Church. So, that's how that went. But we were never forced into it. Like, we had to go, but they never forced us to be Christians. So that's a good part.
On the topic of leadership again, in one of your videos, you mentioned going down to the Million Man March with Farrakhan.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like? Did you leave feeling disillusioned by black leadership or black folks, or were you inspired? Because for me, I guess you could say maybe I came into my wokeness 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and my disillusionment left a lot of resentment in me that I'm still working on. Like, when I leave the house, I see the injustices, I see the disparities, and it's like my vision's kind of cloudy, and I'm trying to wipe off my glasses, but I don't know how to put it into words right now. But when you left that march, how did you feel?
I felt good. When I left the march, I felt good. When I went to the march, I felt good. Everything leading up to the march and after the march, I would say right after the march, I felt good, because it was the brothers that were there, and there were some sisters there too, but mostly the brothers that was there, and the energy that was there, and the positive energy, and the inspiration, and all of that came with it. It's like it was a lot of love at that march. I used the example of recently on a show. I said that if you were to hold up $20 bill in the air, people would pass that $20 bill 50 yards until they got into a basket, and nobody would think about taking the money.
What was the intention behind that march anyway? Just solidarity?
The purpose for the people that were there, meaning the people that made up the million, the grunts, so to speak, was solidarity. It was a show that we can come together and be in peace, and we were looking for a plan, something to move forward with after the march. I think, and keep in mind, I'm speculating, so I'm not going to just say this as if it's facts, but it's my strong opinion that the purpose of the Million Man March for the people that organized it was to show that they're the leaders of black people. And the Million Man March was basically a glorified cattle count for them. That's just my personal opinion.
You know what? I got to agree with you, man. I really do. And I see political leaders or black leaders, since we're on the topic of black liberation. I see a lot of black leaders doing a lot of grandstanding and let me speak for the people on behalf of the people. Mm-hmm. And when I see clips of it, that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. I had recently posted up, if you're in the Kung Fu pictures, there's this Kung Fu picture, classic Kung Fu picture from back in the day. It's called Mad Monkey Kung Fu. And in the movie, there's a training sequence where the teacher is teaching his student, you know, his style, like Mad Monkey style.
Is that from, what's his name, Jackie Chan, Drunken Master?
No,
No.
I know which one you're talking about. It's not that one.
Okay, all right.
But in this one, the teacher is teaching him, and he's going through this whole training session. And toward the end of the training session, the student, after he learns the style, he manages to hit the teacher. And when he hits the teacher, you know, falls down, and the student is like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry." And they go to the look on the teacher's face, and the teacher's smiling. And then that's how the scene ends. And I posted that on Facebook, and I said, I bet you that these black talking heads of the conscious community and these misery merchants probably don't understand what that scene represented. Because the scene represents the teacher whose job it was to educate this student and teach him to the point where this student mastered what he taught him so well that he didn't need him anymore. And he didn't look at that as a bad thing. He was proud. Because that's the point. If you're teaching people, then you want them to be better than you. Leadership, or so-called black leadership, or black talking heads, or whoever, whatever you want to call them of today, they're not interested in uplifting and teaching the people so that the people can move forward with the information. They're interested in being the king of consciousness. They're interested in expanding their brand. And see, what makes me resonate with a lot of people is that I don't need black folks for me to eat. So there's no financial benefit to me doing what I'm doing. I don't collect any money from black folks. My livelihood is not dependent. I can pay my rent without black folks helping me because I work. So when I do my videos and I give my opinions and stuff, it's coming from a place where you can trust me because I don't have no ulterior motives with this. I've totally demonetized my YouTube channel. So when everybody was freaking out when YouTube apocalypse came and advertisers started controlling the content, it didn't affect me because I wasn't getting no checks from YouTube anyway. And it was my way of telling YouTube, fuck you. You don't tell me what I can put and what I can say in my videos. So when you go to my channel and you check on my videos, it goes straight to my content. There's no advertisements on my videos. Now, there's negatives with that. When you don't participate in their advertising, they kind of algorithm you out. So I don't get the amount of views that I would normally get because you have to share. Like, my audience has to share my videos in order for people to see them. Because my subscribers don't even know when I upload. That's how they algorithm you out.
As blacks, we talk a lot about fighting for liberation. But I'll be the first to admit that I really do enjoy European luxuries. So do you think we suffer from Stockholm Syndrome?
Yeah. But when you say European luxuries, what do you mean?
The television, the fast food.
Well, I don't consider luxuries that we have here in America and you have in other first world nations as property of the European. Like if you just look at the fictional nation of Wakanda in the movie, they had no connection with European luxuries, yet they had a luxurious existence. So I don't think that living comfortably or having the amenities that a first world nation provides is the property of the European. And this is the great part. I'm glad you asked that question because it gets into the mindset of the people who fight against nationhood a lot. They feel like they got to sacrifice everything, and the way that they live now is not the way that they can live in their new nation. And what I say is that the way you live in your new nation can be even more comfortable and even more luxurious than how you're living now, because it would be designed with you in mind. Like, wouldn't it be beautiful, like, as a black man, to be able to go into a store and know that you're not going to be followed around? To drive in your car down a highway and know that the chances of you being shot and killed because you black is virtually non-existent? Wouldn't that be beautiful? Because the society is yours. So all of these stereotypes and all of this stuff that comes with being here in America, you wouldn't even have to deal with. You wouldn't have to deal with prejudice and racism and all the other stuff and have this constant monkey on your back every time, or constantly have to worry about how the overall society is viewing you. Like things like, you can name your children an African name without feeling like you're handicapping them. Because that's a decision a lot of parents make. They're like, do I want to name my child an African name, or maybe I should name them something where nobody knows what the hell they are?
And that's one thing I struggled with when I was a kid, having an African name. And, I mean, it took me a while. Eventually, you know, I appreciated my name. The history behind, not the history behind it, I'll say. The meaning, there you go. I appreciated the meaning behind my name, you know, and it's a sad thing that, you know, something as important as your name, you live in a place that makes you ashamed of it.
Exactly.
You know? So I get where you're coming from. Now, in a lot of your videos, I kind of picked up, you got a disdain for individualism.
I don't have a disdain for individualism. I think that people overemphasize individualism and don't have a true understanding of what it is. You are an individual because the culture needs different ways of looking at things. That's the reason why everybody doesn't see things the same way. But it doesn't mean that you're an island unto yourself. Because you weren't produced by yourself. You were produced by the culture. You had a mother, had a father, they produced you. And for the vast majority of your life, you weren't independent. You were dependent on those around you for safety, food, clothing, shelter, health, education, everything. You spent the majority of your life dependent. So I think that people just have a misunderstanding of what independence and individualism means. It's like I love being an individual. I love having my particular perspective and take on things. But I always know that the reason why I'm designed that way and the reason why I have that different perspective is so that I can help and benefit the whole. It's not just for me. And I think that's the different take that I have on it than most people do.
Earlier you had mentioned misery merchants. Can you share what misery merchants are?
Misery merchants are what I call the black talking heads of the conscious community. The conscious community is like what I call a vague abstraction of what blackness is, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not African-centered, number one, because you can be in a conscious community and be into all types of ideologies and New Age religions, and, you know, they got a mixture of Native American, they got a mixture of imaginary places and languages and people claiming to be from other planets and stuff like that. It's a whole bunch, it's a hodgepodge of ideologies. And people that I call misery merchants, the conscious community is an industry. It's a hustle. And as long as you can convince people that they're going to be a part of some perpetual struggle for the rest of their life, you can benefit from that financially. You have a vested interest in them being involved in the struggle. You have a vested interest in talking about racism and white supremacy. It's sort of like your bread and butter. People like me, the conscious community, and people like those black talking heads and these misery merchants, and when I say misery merchants specifically, what I mean is they're not happy when black folks are happy. They're happy when black folks are miserable, and they benefit financially when black folks are miserable, when black folks are scared, when black folks are paranoid, because they feed into their fear and their paranoia. with the content that they provide to them. It's not solution-oriented material. It's basically confirmation bias. So if you think the white man is the reason why you don't have anything, then I'm going to show you why the white man is the devil. I'm going to confirm your bias already. And I benefit from it because you're going to keep getting my material, so I can keep telling you how the white man is the devil.
All right. Well, Holipsism, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you got to go to work, and I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all my questions, man.